tough week. We continue resurrecting truth in God's love and following that love as it leads to the cross. This is week 3, so another candle. Lose its light. We're talking about a passage that everybody knows. It's 1 Corinthians 13. As you heard Dan read earlier, I want to make something clear right here at the outset. Paul was not preaching the homily in a wedding when he wrote this. Paul was writing to a church that was broken. Church that he talked to them first about the fact that some were saying, I followed Dan, and some were saying, I followed Derek. And he said, it doesn't matter if you followed Dan or you followed Derek, which one did the planting, which one did the watering. God is the one that makes that grow. God's the one who gave that good news that you are in, that brings you that love. He talked to them about the fact that the people were bringing the class that they were in society into their place of worship. They were sitting at the table of love, and they were sitting by class, and the people who were higher in society got to have all the food first. And if the people sitting in the back of the sanctuary didn't get any food, well, that was not the people up front's problem. They deserved to get what they got. And he told them they clearly misunderstood what they were in. He talked to them about the fact that some of them thought that they were preachers and that made them better than somebody who had the gift of teaching, or somebody who had the gift of speaking in tongues, or somebody who had the gift of hospitality. And he said, preachers, you're wrong. It doesn't make you better. We need everybody's gifts. And throughout all of this, telling them they're wrong, he keeps telling them, you've got to love. You've got to love. Love is stronger than all of these other things. If you will just love, you will stop treating one another this way. And he finally hits this moment in 1 Corinthians 13 where he writes this beautiful thing, this thing that for 2,000 years we've been referencing it in weddings and in so many places because he wrote something that we touch love with. It's like the monks talk about the thin places where we see God closer inside creation than we normally do. 1 Corinthians 13 is like that for us. It's this recognition of love and its power that we don't always see. It's a putting into words something that's inside of us, inside of our heart. The contemplatives call this the great chain of being. This recognition of the love of God that is in everything. It's contemplation. It's realizing God is in everything. That everything and everybody is an experience of God's love. And if you don't love everything, then there's a reason to doubt whether you love anything. Because love is part of the core of us. Paul talks about this, the 3 things, faith, hope, and love. If we were Catholic, we would have been being taught that these are the theological virtues. That we don't need the moral virtues that we've been taught. We need the theological virtues, the faith, hope, and love, because that's the participation inside of us with God. That's the essence of God that God has put into each one of us. Faith, hope, and love. When we are in that, we are in God. And that's what Paul's trying to drive home. And it seems easy to say love, because we all know about love, but it's really hard to fully understand it. And it's hard to teach it and to preach it. And I'm going to tell a story, and it's a difficult story to tell. It's a story I've told before. It's a story I will tell again. It's a very personal story for me. It's a story where I have often shed a tear when I've told it, and I probably will again as I tell it here, and that's okay. It's okay to shed a tear. And I'm not broken by shedding a tear. And the key thing that I want you to know going into the story, and I want me to know every time I go into the story, is I'm not the hero in this story. I'm a participant in this story, but I am not the hero in this story. So the story goes something like this. Like most of my stories, it starts at church camp. I was an 8th grade boy, just finished 8th grade, and I was at church camp. And we had just had worship. We were in the hills of New Mexico, outside Carlsbad, where the trees were about this tall, and there were rocks everywhere, and there were ravines, and it was beautiful because we were from the desert plains of the Permian Basin where it was just flat and there was nothing, and so it was nice to walk up and down some. And so we would go down into the ravine to worship and see the fire reflected off of the rocks and experience God. And they were very emotional worships. There was a lot of dredging up emotions so that we could get you to see that you needed God. You need Jesus. If you didn't realize you need Jesus, even though you're at church camp and you came to church camp, you need Jesus. In case you forgot in the last 24 hours, we're going to make sure and tell you over and over. So we finished worship and we're heading up because these adults, I really don't understand adults back then. They would open the camp store after worship, let us get as much sugar as we wanted, and then tell us to go to bed. It was very successful. And I'm heading up to the camp store to get my load of sugar, and there's a girl, and she's kind of separated herself, and she's a little bit in the shadows, and she's crying. And I was like, well, that's not good. So I went to do what every 8th grade boy has been taught to do. I'm going to go be the white knight in this story, find out who hurt her so I can go hurt them and make her feel better. Because that's what every girl wants when they're crying. I was convinced of that. So I go over to her and ask her what's wrong, and she turns and just puts her head on my shoulder, and she's not crying a little. She's not that little bit upset. She can't speak full out. Tragic crying. Kind of crying when you just can't speak, and she was like that for a while. So I just stood there hugging her, realizing I'd gotten in over my head, and she finally got to a point where she could talk, and I said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "I'm all alone." And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, I used to have an older brother, but he died several years ago of leukemia. And after he died, my parents couldn't handle it, and they got divorced. And my father has moved. I think he's in Tennessee, but he's changed his name, and I don't know where he is. And my mother has gotten remarried, and she loves the man she's married to now more than she loves me. I didn't understand as an 8th grade boy that meant that she was being abused, and her mother didn't believe her. I was an 8th grade boy. I don't blame myself for not understanding that then. There was a time in my life where I thought I should have, but I've grown up and realized better. And so she said, I am the last person in my family who will ever have my last name. When I'm gone, my last name will disappear. I am all alone. And I said, the only thing I knew to say, I said, I'll be your big brother. And she went off, that 7th grade girl, and held me to that. So when I talk about family, I talk about my older sister and I talk about my younger sister. My older sister is my biological sister. She is 4 years older than me, 4 years and 2 days. So she already had her birthday. I like to remind her that she's even older than 4 years. And I talk about my younger sister. And my younger sister I saw for the next 5 years, 2 weeks in the summer. She would come to Midland with a friend of hers whose parents had gotten divorced, and that friend stayed with her father for the summer, and so Kristen would come out and stay a week with her and then go to church camp with all of us. And so I would get to see her when she was in town and then at church camp for the week, and that was our 2 weeks of being brother and sister. And we occasionally contacted one another during the year, but not too much. We were young teenage kids who were busy. But those 2 weeks were always special for us. And there were people who had grown up in church with me who started to believe that she really was my younger sister. That somehow, some way, she biologically was my younger sister who lived in another town. Because we just were like that. It just became a part of who we were. And to the point where when my older sister got married, she was there staying in the house with us, there at the wedding. She became part of the family. She was invited to all the family reunions. She just became a part of us. And so then I graduated. I came to see her while she was still in school. Saw her, and then I moved to California. And when I was in California, I came back and saw her. She had gotten engaged, and she introduced me to her fiance and asked me to perform the wedding. And I was honored to be asked, and I was excited that I was going to get to perform my first wedding. And then I went back to California, and a few months later, she called. And it had taken her 3 days to find somebody who had my number, because we had lost contact. She had moved a couple of times and had lost my phone number in California. And so she called me. It was late at night for me in California, which meant it was later at night for her. And she said, my mom has cancer. She got breast cancer, and it is metastasized, and it is all over. And when I found out the news, my fiance couldn't handle it, and he left me. And so I'm leaving school. I'm moving into a one-bedroom apartment with my mother so that I can take care of her. And so for the next 15 months, most nights would end with me on the phone talking to her about her day and about taking care of her mom and us trying to share a laugh together. I read up more on cancer so that I would understand a little more what she was going through, because I still had never experienced anything like she was experiencing. But I was slowly experiencing it with her. For those of you who are younger, back then, there A, weren't cell phones, and B, was this thing called long-distance charges. So I was running up a phone bill of about $200 a month. I was making $750 a month in my job, so it was a decent cut of my paycheck, and I honestly can tell you that I didn't notice back then. It just wasn't It was just another one of the expenses. It was just something that had to be done. And her mother died right after Christmas, 4 days before I was supposed to move back to Texas. And she called me and said, don't come to the funeral. Finish up in California at the church that you're at, and when you move back to Texas, come see me. And so that's what I did. I always regretted that I didn't get on a plane and fly back, but I did what she asked me to do, and I know she did it out of respect for me. So then I was in Austin, and she was in Arlington, and she got re-engaged, and I did get to perform her wedding, and then she helped make sure Robin and I didn't screw up too badly when we got married. She kind of got me to the church on time since I didn't get there on time for the rehearsal. And we went back and forth weekends, sharing life together, and her husband and Robin got as close as we were. And then by chance, Robin ended up in graduate school up here, and we ended up in Arlington together. For the first time in our life, we lived in the same town and got to see each other every week, spend time together regularly. And then in the summer of '99, she looked at me. I had been out of church for 8 years. The last 2 churches I had worked at had gone badly. I had sworn I would never work for a church again. And I had left church, and every church I walked into after that, my whole feeling, as many people who've been in church and been hurt by church understand, was these people are judging me. Even when nobody in that church knew me, I was convinced these people are judging me, because that's what I had been taught. Because in my life, growing up, this kind boy who met her knew that I could look at her, oh, I see the sin in that person's life. They need Jesus. I better either try to get them to come to church or stay away from them. And, oh, yep, that person needs Jesus. And then there were some people at church who, they come to church, but they still need Jesus. And she didn't see people like that. Somehow she didn't get that. She just saw people and loved them. And she ended up getting me to make friends with some people who I had been taught weren't the people I was supposed to make friends with. They were pretty nice people. But for me, once I had left church, I was one of those people who church people thought needed Jesus. And so every time I walked into church, I knew I was being judged. And that's the way it was anytime I went to church, so I didn't go to church. And in the summer of '99, she looked at me and she said, we were better people when we went to church. And I knew her really well. And I could tell tone of voice. And I knew what she was really saying was, you were a lot better person when you went to church. And she was right. Many times in life I had wanted to go back and talk to her. Let's go get everybody together that we used to go to church camp with and just go back to church camp, because things were fun and we were nice to each other and just, we were better people then. We were tapped into something better. And she would say, you can't go back. You can't go back. But we went to church. She took me into this little disciples church where I ended up staying, and we made a vow when we went, us 2 couples, that we would slide in at the start of worship, slide out at the end of worship, not get caught up in all this church stuff. You know, they start dragging you in and getting you into a class or helping out with something. Next thing you know, they're trying to make you moderator of a board or something like that. No, we're going to slide in, slide out, get our Jesus and get away. And that didn't last very long for any of us. And shortly we were sponsoring youth, but in the midst of that, as we were coming in, just starting to visit the church, she said, I have a brain tumor. And so it was a tough one. It was not a good brain tumor. There were only 2 people in the world who could operate on it. One of them was in San Francisco. And so she and her husband and I flew to San Francisco, and she had the surgery. It went as well as it could. And she came back, and she relearned how to read, and through it all, smiling, joyful, just the most joyful person you ever met in your life. Through it all. And so we came back, and we took care of youth, and we had fun, and we saw each other, and we played, and then about 5 years later, she had to have an emergency surgery because the tumor had grown, and we had that one. When she came out of that one, I was kind of happy. She had some memory loss, and she was in the ICU, and I was in there with her stepmom and her husband, and the nurse said, who are these people? And she said, well, that's my brother, and that's my husband, and I'm really not sure who that lady is. I was like, well, she remembers me. There were some hard times in there, but it was wonderful. But about a year later, she went to take a nap and didn't wake up. And so that was hard. It was a hard year. It was the hardest year of Robin and I's marriage. I can't say it was the hardest year of Robin's life. It was the hardest year of my life and the hardest year of our marriage. But after that year was over, Dr. Lord, the senior minister at the church there where I was working, talked to me, and he said, she came to me and talked to me. I said, when was this? And he said, August of 99. And she said, I'm going to die. Don't know how quickly, but I'm going to die. And my husband and my brother are going to need people to love them through that. They're going to need a church family. So I'm coming to have them come here and have you guys take care of them. That ripped me up because that was a week before she told us she had a brain tumor and a month before we visited that church. At a time in her life when she really needed some faith and some hope and some love, God let me be an ambassador of that, to remind her that God loved her, that there was a reason for her to have faith, that there was a reason for her to have hope. And when that time was coming for me, God let her be that ambassador to remind me that there was a reason to have faith and a reason to have hope and a reason to know there was love. You can't stand at a whiteboard and teach faith, hope, and love. They are these lived things that are inside you that come out. We see it. Those thin places I talked about, like Paul gave us in 1 Corinthians 13, they happen. They happen in our lives today. You can go through the decades and see it. In the 60s, Louis Armstrong had What a Wonderful World. High school kids today can sing that song or hear that song, and they feel it. They feel that thin place. God has created something wonderful. And when I look past the negative, there it is. Johnny Nash, when I hear, I can see clearly now the rain is gone. It is just like when I heard it as a child in the 70s. And it just lets me know everything's going to be all right. It's a thin place. In the 80s, as a teenager, Steve Winwood told me to seek a higher love, that there was a higher love. And I can still get that from Steve today. In the 90s, Mariah Carey at Boys to Men told me that there will be one sweet day. And I felt that one sweet day and can feel it still. In the 2000s, Fantasia said, I believe, and I believe right along with her. In the 2010s, Katy Perry told me I was a firework, and I shared that I was a firework with everybody I could. It was my prayer song for a year, because those are all tapping into that core that's inside of us, that peace of God that lives inside of us and that is in every single person that we come in contact with. That faith, that hope, that love. Faith tells us that it all of it, good and bad, means something. And the hope tells us that it's going somewhere, and that somewhere will be good. And the love tells us that even I am included, even me. And Paul made it clear, love never ends. Let's pray. God, we are so thankful that you wrap us in your love. For every experience you give us that reminds us that you are right here with us, holding us and inviting us to fully experience all that you have put within us and given to us and others. And we thank you for those people who help us to realize and tap into all the gifts that you have given us, those people who see all of who we are, of who you have made us to be, even when we don't see it ourselves. We are so fortunate to have you guiding all of us, to have your creation guiding all of us, to have your word guiding all of us. And we ask that your Spirit be on us and guide us still, that we may see you in everyone and everything as we go through this life in your kingdom. Amen.